what I'm finding is that there are a number of people who, there's various levels of engagement. There are people who, mainly parents and family members, who, people in Family Fellowship and other organizations that provide terrific support. The terrible thing, I think, is when parents feel caught between their child and the church. And I think that's a terrible place for a parent to be. And some parents choose the church and some parents choose the child. And it's kind of a Sophie's choice situation. And so I think the more that parents feel that they can accept their child and accept the church, that that's not a choice one has to make. And yet it can sometimes be a very painful place because, again, we have all of these old ideas. I have a good friend in Washington, who's in Washington, D.C., who was talking about how her father, who was a bishop in Salt Lake, would not allow her and her family to come for family reunion because they had a gay son. And she was saying, she was telling this story that was very touching. She said, my son and his partner were moving into an apartment in Florida or someplace, and we went down to help them move in. And she said, when my son was at the top of the stairs and he called down to his partner, said, "Honey, would you bring me this?" She said, I suddenly, for the first time, realized that his relationship with his partner was the same as my relationship with my husband, that deep love and affection. And she said, as long as she's lived with it, she said it was just kind of a revelation to her. And so I think the more people can begin to see homosexuals as fully human, with all of the needs, all of the desires, all of the complexities that every human experiences, rather than as aberrant or perverse or all of the other things we have seen them. I think the more we do that, the more we will be able to move more quickly into a place of normalcy.
Sure. Well, then let's unpack that, or if you would unpack it a little bit more in terms of how to go about doing that from a member's perspective, maybe a slightly more orthodox member's perspective. Especially, I mean, sadly, the adage still is, love the sinner but hate the sin, and the application, interpretation up behind that is tricky for people. How would you go about?
Well, I think that one of the things that for me is to recognize that there's a double standard. There's a very clear double standard. Okay. In every ward in the church, there are heterosexuals cohabiting. They have home teachers, they have visiting teachers, they are welcome at church. That's not the same for homosexuals. You can, and for people to make the equation, it's a false equation to say, well, asking homosexuals to be celibate is the same as asking heterosexuals to. Heterosexuals can date openly. They can be openly affectionate. They are encouraged to be. They are encouraged to marry. There's a terrific support system set up for heterosexuals who can have romantic relationships, who can have affectionate relationships, who can have even perhaps semi-erotic experiences. But all of that is forbidden for homosexuals, even the appearance of it, even holding hands or even hugging. Any of that is, and my, one of the things that I felt when I stopped being bishop of the LA First Ward, I thought, okay, in the 21st century, one of the biggest problems the church faces is what to do with singles. Another huge problem the church faces is what to do with homosexuals. And I came to the conclusion that the only solution, at least as far as I was concerned, was to have a level playing field. Everyone is held to a premarital chastity and postmarital fidelity. And one of the reasons I was supportive of Proposition 8 is because it provided that. It provided that level playing field. You could hold everybody to the same standard. And I think that eventually we will come to that. But, as human beings, one of the things we know about us is that we need touch.
Yeah.
And that people who are deprived of touch have more difficulty. Now, I don't set the standards for the church, and I've never preached against church doctrine, even though I've been accused of doing that.
Right.
The church has its responsibility as an ecclesiastical institution.
Yeah.
I have my responsibilities as an individual Mormon Christian.
Yeah.
And I feel very clear and very certain about what that means for me. And so...
what does it mean for you?
What it means for me is exactly all are likened to God. Black, white, male, female, master, slave, gay, straight. Yeah. That I can't imagine Jesus as being anything other than absolutely open and loving in his treatment of all of his children. Yeah. And so my responsibility is to, in the Mosiah 17, to mourn with those that mourn, comfort those that comfort, or those that stand in need of comfort, and to stand as a witness of God at all times and all places that I may be in. And one of the ways in which I think I bear witness is to be a friend and a brother and to my homosexual brothers and sisters, and to try and help my fellow Latter-day Saints to understand that as a core part of who we are as God's children.
But how do we do that, again, in a way that it just can be hard to negotiate as a member of the church, to say, well, I do love and I support, or I feel like I do, or I feel like I want to love and support my gay brothers and sisters, but I also I feel this compulsion to make it clear, what I believe in terms of what the church prescribes about homosexuality and the practice of it, the indulgence in the behavior that if I were a very Orthodox member, I hear that often, that I love and I do hope you feel I love and I support you, but I want to make it clear that it's not okay with me to actually act on those feelings.
Okay, and again, I had an experience a few years ago when I was on the High Council of the Santa Cruz Stake, and I had just published with Bill Bradshaw and Ron Scow and Mary Beth Raines a little pamphlet called Guide for Understanding Homosexuality for Latter-day Saint Families. It was published by Deseret Book.
Yeah,
and
I gave it to my mother.
Oh, did you?
Yes, very helpful.
And so I was just telling the High Council that this was available, and anyone who in their work wanted to copy, I'd be happy to make a copy for them. The stake president said, later he said, he took pains right then to say, yes, but the church's stand is. And later, when this other episode happened that I mentioned to you, he said, you were not teaching correct doctrine. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you forgot to talk about the church's stand. And I said, look, President, I said, everybody in that room knows the church's stand to the middle of their bones. Yeah. It was unnecessary for me to say that. We all know that. So I think of a story that Marion D. Hanks told when I was traveling our mission when I was a young missionary. And he talked about he had to discipline one of his children, and she stood in the corner and was crying. And he said, I noticed one of her sisters came in. And she looked at me, and then she looked at her. And she went over and put her arms around her sister. Yeah. And that's, I think, what we do. Again, I say, if in any ward you are friendly and accepting of people for whatever, that we bring people into our congregations and are nurturing, and we fellowship them if they've been guilty of a lot of things, including theft and larceny and all kinds of other things. Yeah. uh, we tend to put certain transgressions or sins or behaviors in a different category, and we also tend to treat people differently. I feel that anyone who chooses to be celibate and completely engaged in the church is someone that I have great respect for. I also, if people feel they can't do that, I respect their choice. I came away from that 5 years being a bishop to say, if it were required of me to be celibate my whole life and not to have any affectionate or romantic expression, could I do it? I couldn't answer that question. I don't know. Right. But I think that I think it's a very hard thing to ask someone to do. And if people understand that, I think that, but if people choose not to, it doesn't mean that we divorce them from our family, that we cease to see them as Latter-day Saints, that we cease to see them as our own children. I mean, when I was a bishop, I was invited to come and speak to the North Seattle stake about my experience. And in that stake, there were 2 or 3 bishops who had gay children. There was a member of the High Council who was gay. But the member of the stake presidency who invited me said, you know, we have Latter-day Saints who commit suicide here, and their families won't come to the funeral. And I don't understand that. It's not something that fits within my understanding of what it means either to be human or to be Christian. So I think it's difficult, and I think it's difficult both for homosexuals, for family members, and for people who are simply trying to move this conversation forward. It's difficult because the church has a very clear standard, and the church has very clear principles, and I make covenants in the temple, but I also make covenants at the waters of baptism and each Sunday at sacrament. And I went through this during the civil rights movement. I felt that I didn't understand why blacks couldn't hold the priesthood. I was very involved in the civil rights movement, and it didn't make any sense to me. I tried to find ways to rationalize it, finally couldn't rationalize it, but I didn't leave the church over it. I didn't chain myself to the temple doors. I didn't publish broadsides against the church. I tried in my own way to work for change on that issue as I have on this issue. And whether the church changes in this regard, that's up to the church. I can see the church has made a lot of changes. I think that the fact that there are both open and more private meetings being held and discussions at a high level, that there is an openness. I am privileged to know a couple of general authorities on a personal basis, and I have conversations with them about this, and they respect the fact that I have come to this with a great deal of anguish and thought and prayer, and that I don't hold the understandings I have lightly, but I hold them because they seem to me to be part of my integrity as a human being and as a Christian Mormon. Absolutely. So I make the distinction between, that is, no church can be responsible for the act of any individual member. No individual member can be responsible for what a church does. There's a difference between an institution. So what I have tried to do is say, okay, given what the church's standards are, given the realities that we have a growing number of people who are open about their homosexuality, how can we deal with that? How can we deal with that as brothers and sisters? How can we deal with that as people who try with our hearts to understand what it's like to be to be gay. And I think when people really come to that point of understanding, it changes them.